Hey friends! After 4 whole years of not living in my home country Sweden, which I am now, I am more excited than I've ever been before about being home, and I wanted to share a little bit with you about why I'm so excited, because there are some things I've missed a whole lot living abroad. I actually moved abroad about 11 years ago, and then during that time I've been home for weeks or sometimes months in between, but I haven't really lived in Sweden or appreciated it this much in a long time. So now it's been a long time and I want to share with you the things I've missed the most about Sweden that I haven't found exists in the countries I've lived in. So let's get started. Number one is, of course, silence. And I'm not only talking about silence in like outside of your house, because I am living at a farm, at my granddad's farm, so it is very, very quiet here compared to in the city. But in general, Sweden is so much more quiet than I think every other country I've lived in. And one of the things I always struggle with being abroad is the level of noise. And this is like the level of sound in the whole freaking country. In the post office, how loud people are speaking, how loud kids are. Sweden is just so much more quiet than any other country I've lived in, because in general people tend to speak quite quietly. There's never any music blasting around in inappropriate spaces or in grocery stores, and we tend to be quite respectful of each other's space and also sound. And there's also quite high awareness, I think, of the overwhelming sensation and how uncomfortable it can be for people with too many loud noises. So in general, this is probably one of the things I've missed the most. Yeah. Number two is something I've really only ever experienced in Australia and New Zealand, but that is where I've been for the last 4 years, and I'm so glad that I don't have this in my life anymore, and that is closed curtains. Now this may sound crazy, but living in New Zealand, one of the things I missed the most was seeing houses without the curtains drawn. I'd honestly forgotten how it looked until I came back to Sweden, back to Europe, to my home country. You see, in New Zealand, people tend to close their curtains even in summer. In summer, maybe to keep the heat out, and also in winter to keep the cold out, because the windows aren't very insulated, they're not double glazed. But it also seems to be a cultural thing. People don't want other people to look into your houses, and yeah, I just really don't like it. In Sweden, we even joke about people who keep their curtains closed, that something not so good is going on there, because why else would you close your curtains? Don't we want to look outside and see other things? And you know, and it's also not very economical to have your lights on all the time, right? It just is so different to be here and drive into town, or even walking at nighttime. I was like having dinner at my brother's place and I could see the whole yard and people walking past, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so nice, because we have nothing to hide and they're not gonna stare either. So it's just this mutual respect and mutual openness that I really, really missed. The next one is very Scandinavian specific, I think, and that is cosiness as a life goal. Now, other cultures abroad, they have many life values, but I don't think cosiness, or what became known in America as hygge, from the Danish word hygge, is as big of a part of the culture. I just realized this when my sister and I were talking about some plans we were making, and she said, oh yeah, but like, let's make sure it's cozy, or that would be cozy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't tried to make anything in my life cozy for the last 4 years. I like visiting my family and friends' homes. Everyone has like blankets and soft indoor shoes and candles and dim lighting and decorations for Christmas and stuff. And obviously the famous Swedish Christmas decorations that you can still see in most people's houses when I at least got here, because it was close to Christmas. And it's just so much cozier and it's such a fun value to have in your culture, to try to make life more cozy, especially in winter when we're just cold and miserable inside. A simpler thing I've missed is, of course, the baked goods. We have namely the cinnamon bun, the semla, the princess cake. There are just so many delicious Swedish baked goods that I absolutely love, that I grew up with, and that make me feel nostalgic and happy. And luckily these days I can find them all vegan wherever I go. So if you ever go to Malmö, I highly recommend you visit Bageri Levé, which is my favorite place to get a Swedish semla, cinnamon roll, or even a saffron bun for Christmas. Another really nice thing about Sweden, especially that I miss living in New Zealand, and also China, I guess, is having insulated, healthy homes. Now, when I was young moving abroad, I never thought this was something I would miss, because it was something I frankly took for granted for my entire life. The fact that I've always been warm and cozy inside, even when it's been minus 20 degrees Celsius outside, or there's a snowstorm, or even if the house I'm living in like this hasn't been renovated since the 70s. I'm still super warm and comfortable inside because of our house building standards, our efficient heating systems, and just the regulations. Gosh, I love Swedish regulations. That should be another point, really. With this also comes my favorite thing, again, something I missed immensely, is the fact that there's no trespassing here. I literally can't trespass. Of course, you can't break into someone's property in Sweden and do whatever you want there, but we don't really have a trespassing culture. First of all, going back to the responsibility, people are allowed to walk absolutely wherever they want. Like my granddad's fields out here, people are allowed to walk on them and people are allowed to walk around them as long as they're not causing any harm to his property. So if one of my other neighbors wants to take a walk around my granddad's field, they can, and my granddad's not going to go out there with a little gun or put up some fences around his fields. So that's a really nice openness that although I'm on a farm in the countryside, there's no fencing, there is no barbed wire, there is no like signs ever that says trespassing or private property. Instead, it's just like open and free because people are nice. And yeah, that's it. Whereas in New Zealand, the trespassing signs were everywhere and all the time, and honestly I feel like they create a bit of a hostile environment. If you're, for example, out hiking and you mistakenly walk on someone's private property, and that feels quite uncomfortable. Like, could you do something illegal simply for walking on someone else's farm? That to me seems crazy. So yeah, I'm definitely Swedish at heart. Another thing I've missed about Sweden is that we have no stray animals, and that is so awesome. I think again this is a privilege that I didn't realize growing up, but it's so nice, especially for my heart, to not see stray animals everywhere or anywhere that needs taken care of. There are no cats or dogs wandering around the streets. We don't have overfilled shelters filled with animals that are being, you know, sent to be euthanized. Instead, people in general take really good care of their animals. It's so nice to not have any stray animals. You don't need to worry about getting bitten, but you also don't need to see animals suffering. And that is really nice. Of course, one of the things I've missed the most is, as a woman, is gender equality. Isn't that nice? Compared to New Zealand, where I've had men not shake my hand but shakes my husband's hand, or said things like, oh wow, so you're building a van because it needs a woman's touch, and sort of negating that I did all the work and my husband was working with something else during that time. Just really stuff like that. It's a lot nicer to be a woman in Sweden than it is being a woman in Australia or New Zealand and in Asia, in my experience. I never really feel like I'm being treated as a woman here. I feel like I'm being treated as a person first. Although we're not where we want to be or where I think any country should be, I'm being respected in the same way as my brother, my dad, or my husband, which is really nice and important. Something I've also missed a whole lot is cozy cafes, and especially cozy cafes that are like tucked away far from the streets. There are no cars or noises, and people can happily leave their kids sleeping outside in their strollers. Cozy cafes is one of my favorite things about Sweden. It's nice that you can go for a fika at 11 a.m. or at 4 p.m. in some places, and there is nothing better than a fika date in Sweden. The opposite of unhealthy desserts is less processed foods. I've really missed having the availability of less processed foods and healthier unhealthy food, if that makes sense. In New Zealand, in my experience, it was very difficult to find baked goods that didn't contain, like, you know, E-numbers or additives, emulsifiers, or basically things you don't really want in your food because they are not food, so highly processed foods. In Sweden, I've been able to find digestive biscuits without any E-numbers and freshly baked goods without any strange emulsifiers or ingredients, and it's just quite nice to see food, as I've said in my other video about Sweden, with this from scratch, right? We don't really have the expression from scratch because if you're paying for food or if you're making food yourself, you do expect it to be from scratch with real whole ingredients. Another thing that I've really missed is that recycling is completely normal here. Recycling is super easy and really been enabled by the government, which is really nice. Also, education on recycling has been really well. So even my 86-year-old granddad is recycling, which I think is a win for any society. As a minimalist or a lover of natural things and calm things, one of my favorite things that I really missed about Sweden is less advertising. One of the biggest shocks when I went to visit my friends in America was the billboards, right? I'd never seen a billboard in my life and I was like, what is this? And how are they allowed to be put here? Like, who owns this land? Because obviously these billboards affect everyone who has to drive on that road to commute or go to work. And honestly, even if they're pretty, they're not really pleasant. I find them an eyesore. I think they're cluttering our society and they're really putting capitalism before enjoyment, right? So same in New Zealand, there are lots of like, you know, those banners and stuff and weird things outside of the car stores. Just lots of things that you don't find here. Here, if there's a car retailer, there will be a name of the car and that will be it. So much nicer for my overstimulated brain. Something I never realized that I would miss, but that I definitely miss moving outside of Europe, was the educated people around me. And this is not meant to sound pretentious at all. In fact, I hope it comes off as the opposite. Because in Sweden, we have free university education. We have also free childcare education. So education is free, but the benefit is that university or second grade education is free, which means that most of the people around you have the same or similar opportunities. They can take the same steps to success. That, I think, in my experience, creates people who feel more part of society. They feel more responsible because they're being given more responsibility. People feel like they have an agency in their lives, which creates happier people, people that take responsibility, and people that strive for things. And since most people have quite a high level of education, they just know a lot of things that are really good to know. For example, that recycling is real, or that flying is bad for the environment. Like, we don't have to discuss these kinds of things in general because people overall know quite a lot. When people aren't happy and respectful and kind and considerate, it brings for a really hostile and uncomfortable environment, right? So having free education, I think, makes people feel less stressed, more in charge, and I think it makes people happier. So I really missed being around educated people, not in a pretentious way, but in a way where it seems to make people's lives a bit easier, which creates for a more compassionate and kind and gentle culture. A more humanistic culture, because that is the goal. Something that I haven't been able to get in New Zealand, Australia as well, because you thought that it would be good, and the one good restaurant I knew in Japan is closed down, and that is falafel. And I mean really, really tasty falafel, not overly fried and dry on the inside falafel, where it's like really hard or weird. People do such strange things with falafel. It's just a very simple, easy, traditional food. Well, in Sweden, I think I've had the best falafel I've ever had. So I love having access to delicious falafel. If you're ever in Lund, you should go to this place because it is the best and super affordable. One thing I really missed, especially in New Zealand, was having EU languages and people all around me. One of my favorite things about living in Europe, and yes, I feel like I'm turning into one of those American people that call, you know, Europe only Europe instead of our individual countries. But you know what? If I am allowed to say the United States without talking about the individual states, I think they're allowed to say Europe as a whole. Because, gosh, Europe is different when you have lived outside of Europe for a long time. And gosh, I love Europe. It's just so nice to have people that are way more like-minded in a sense I just can't even explain. Like, I will never feel at home around, for example, Australians or New Zealanders in the same way I will around Spanish people or Germans, although I really don't have any friends from any of those countries, really. It just feels so nice to be close to different cultures and countries that I love and appreciate, and that we're all sort of different, but we all have some same core values. And it's like those, you know, when you choose your sim character and you sort of choose their core values a little, and they're all a bit different, but you still have the same amount of points. That's, I guess, how I feel like being back in Europe. There are definitely things I don't like about Sweden that I prefer in Italy and vice versa. But it's just so nice to be surrounded by different languages, different cultures, and a somehow core value on education and art over capitalism. Unfortunately, Swedish people are voting all our rights away, but apart from that, it's great. Especially from a New Zealand perspective, one thing I've missed is beautiful houses that are well taken care of. In New Zealand, my experience of houses were that they were horrible. And unfortunately, it's sort of like a trend in Sweden now to build New Zealand houses, these huge, like black or stone houses that honestly I just find appalling after having lived there. Harsh, but true. But apart from those $1 million houses, New Zealand has a lot of houses that are mainly rentals, and people, because they're such expensive rentals and maybe the culture, they don't really take care of their houses. So you'll see the lawns aren't kept, the house hasn't been painted in forever, and everything is sort of, a lot of things are falling apart. Whereas here, we have like a trend. There is a cohesiveness to a lot of the houses. It adds culture and value to the land, I think, and it shows our rich history and heritage. So I really love seeing our red houses with the white knocks and the white windows, and I really like to see the traditional Swedish buildings in towns that have been here for 100 years and will hopefully stand for another 100 to come. And the last thing, apart from my friends and family, is the freedom I feel like I have in Sweden. I'm in Sweden and I'm Swedish, right? So I can say what I want. I can make this video right now speaking about how much I hated our government or how I wanted to single out a person in charge and tell you everything I think they've done wrong. And no one would come after me. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of democracy. We have freedom of no trespassing. We have freedom of being able to walk around freely in our country. It's like in our core values as a country. So it is so nice to feel like I have a freedom here. It feels like I can breathe out and relax because no one's gonna come after me. Like the police isn't gonna get anyone because you speak your opinion or because you speak your truth, even if it's completely biased and wrong. Living in Asian countries and also experiencing enormous privilege, being a Western person, working for a Western company in an Asian country, even then, there is this looming sensation and you feel it around yourself when you start talking about certain things, especially when you start questioning the country's politics and the country's history, and also the history that's been rewritten to favor the winners, right? So it is really, really nice. Sweden is not perfect, but gosh, does it feel good to feel free. Like I feel like if I wanted to, I could run out on the field and get a megaphone and make a video about how I dislike our current prime minister and how I think he's silly and stupid and is ruining our country, and how I think the Swedish people are privileged and ignorant and immature for voting for him. But I can do that. I have the freedom to express myself. I have the freedom to be creatively myself, and no government is gonna take me down, which just feels like an immense, immense freedom, having lived in countries where the people I care about do not experience that freedom. So that's something I would think we should all think about. I know it got a bit serious here towards the end, but those are the things I've missed the most in Sweden. Oh, and clean water. That's a bonus one. Gosh, have I missed clean water. I feel like my body's slowly healing with the clean water. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next week. Hej då!